Welcome to Basic Brewing Video. I'm James Spencer.
I'm Steve Wilkes.
We're back in the kitchen.
Back in the kitchen.
Again, back out where a friend is a friend.
Stop royalty checks.
That's right. This is take two on a previous beer. Do you remember the honey IPA beer that I made with Pog?
Yes.
The Kvike yeast?
Yeah.
Well, Matt Giovanisi and Josh Secor of Gambit Brewing and I got together and reformulate. We tasted that first beer and then we reformulated it to be a little bit different. We tweaked it a little bit. Okay. So let's see. I don't know how much you remember from that first one, but let's taste this second one and see what we did. If you remember, the first one had local honey, which this one does. Mm-hmm. It did not have any hops at the beginning of the boil, the 60-minute boil. All the hops were in a hop stand and in dry hopping afterwards. So this time I put a little bit of, we thought that the bitterness of that first beer could be bumped up a little bit, so I put a little bit of bitterness at the beginning of the boil. I did the same hopping routine for the hop stand essentially, and then I added some more hops in the dry hopping. So
is this a hop monster?
We'll see. I'll see what you think. If you think it's a hop monster, so okay. Why don't you pour, and I'll tell everybody about the beer. Into 8 gallons or 30 liters of water at 163 degrees Fahrenheit or 73 C. I put 10 pounds or 4.5 kilograms of Pilsner malt. I mashed at 154 degrees Fahrenheit or 68 C for 90 minutes. I collected my wort, and at the beginning of a 60-minute boil, I added half an ounce or 14 grams of Centennial at 10.4% alpha acid. Then at the end of the boil, I chilled the wort down to 180 degrees Fahrenheit or 82 C, and I held that temperature with my electric brewing system. And I added for a 20-minute hop stand another 5.5 ounces or 156 grams of Centennial. Oh, and I forgot to say, oh no, I didn't. I didn't add the honey in the boil. After that hop stand, that 20-minute hop stand, I chilled the wort down further to 100 degrees Fahrenheit because I wanted to preserve the hop or the honey character. Then I added 3 pounds or 1.4 kilograms of local honey from our friend Caleb Hutcherson. And then I chilled further down to 76 degrees Fahrenheit or 24 C. I fermented this time, instead of using Imperial Pog, I used Saf Ale USO5 because that's what I had on hand at that time. After fermentation was complete, primary fermentation was complete, I dry hopped with 6 more ounces of the Centennial and 3 ounces of Cryo Cascade at 11.9% alpha acid. And I dry hopped for a few days. When did I dry? Oh, about a week, it looks like here, because I went out of town. So that is the beer. Oh, and I racked it before I bottled it. I racked it into a secondary to clarify it a bit, because that's what I did with the first beer. And then I bottled after that. Original gravity 1067, final gravity 1006 for an ABV of 8%. So it's a little higher in alcohol this time for some reason. So here we go.
Okay.
Cheers. Smells pretty good.
Wow. That's really good.
Do you remember at all what the first beer?
Not really. I mean, I remember the beer, and the first thing I thought of when I tasted this was it tasted like a Two-Hearted Ale, but more lemony. There's a lemoniness to this.
Okay.
But it's very, very Two-Hearted Ale in terms of the hop characteristic. Right. And the malt characteristic, actually.
Yeah.
You know, that's the very first thing I thought it was. This is a Two-Hearted Ale, but it's not.
It's Two Hearted is what, 7.5%? I think 7. This is a little higher in alcohol, and there, of course, there's no honey in the Two Hearted.
Right.
But I get what you mean. The centennial characteristics are there, nice and citrusy and kind of piney. There is a lemon character. I had the luxury of tasting the first beer and this beer side by side. There was even more lemon character in the first beer, and more honey came out in the first beer. I don't know how much of that is the hopping strategy. I don't know how much of that is the Kvike yeast, because the Pog is said to have a lemony character to it. But Matt and Josh and I tasted it on the show, and I think that at least two of us liked the first beer better.
Okay.
This is a wonderful beer.
I think it's great.
But I think the bitterness is more pronounced. It's more of a kind of traditional IPA, and I don't think the first one is like you could taste the honey. I don't know whether you can taste the honey as much in this one.
I don't know. I mean, do some research.
I mean, it's definitely dry. Fond Gravity 1006.
I don't necessarily get honey either. I do, but I very inarticulate. It's like it's there, but it's not there. It's like I'm just trying to decide if I could say to you, "Oh, yes, that's a honey beer." I'm not sure I could.
Or whether you would miss it if it wasn't there.
But see, I think I would miss it. That's the thing. Is that I think that the honey absolutely improves the beer.
Yeah, I think you're right.
But like we're saying, if you handed it to me and said, "Well, tell me the ingredients," I wouldn't necessarily say there's honey in it.
Well, it's very fermentable, so that it dries out the beer a lot at the end, for sure. Which is why when you're brewing a big, this is not necessarily a double IPA, I don't think. But when you're brewing a big old hoppy beer with a lot of malt in it, you want something that dries out the finish. Otherwise, the hops aren't going to shine through as. And this beer was bottled on, what is that, September 27th. So here we are halfway through November.
Yeah.
And it's still holding up pretty good.
That's great. I would say it may just now be coming into its own, really. I think it's great. And you're right, just to talk a little bit about the glop factor. There's some really famous, I'm thinking of a couple of different Belgian beers that are really good. And they're really, really good. But boy, they are sugar bombs. It's just like, oh, man. You drink one of those and you've got to start taking diabetes medicine. It's a whole big thing, get dialysis. But the honey does dry the beer out, and it's not gloppy. It's just a big IPA to me. That's what we got, as far as I'm concerned. And it's a really good one. It's a good example.
Yeah.
It's very West Coast. The other thing I was thinking about when you were rattling off all the hops, did you have to mortgage your house to make this?
Go to patreon.com/basic brewing.
Yeah. This is not a cheap beer.
No. And that's we had a joke on the show. The guys were saying, "I think you ought to put some more hops in it, dude." And I was like, "Okay, patreon.com/basic brewing."
Yeah.
Because we got to pay for ingredients to do the shows and do the research for the recipes and all that stuff. So.
When I had the store, I'd get customers in that were wanting to become professional brewers, which was like 3/4 of my clientele. Everybody's going to open a brewery. About half of them did. At any rate, they'd come in, they'd have these recipes, and they'd brew these beers, and they'd be really good beers. And they'd bring me one, and what do you think? Think I could sell this? Yeah. And then we'd go over the recipe, and I'd say, how many barrels of this are you going to make?
Yeah. How many? Yeah. It's $12 per pint?
Yeah. It's like, and are you sure you can get those South African hops all the time?
Yeah, exactly.
I know they're great.
Are you going to be on contract with New Zealand? Well, luckily,
But that's the nice thing about being a home brewer.
yes,
We don't worry about those things.
that's right.
I got $50. I'm going to make a beer.
You can every batch that you brew can be a one of a kind.
As mine all are.
Sometimes
Well-
on purpose.
The name of my brewery is Willy Nilly's. Smoking hot.
All right, first of 3 shows for the day. Cheers, everybody.
That's a winner.
Come and visit us online at basicbrewing.com. You can find archive lists of our audio and video podcasts on homebrewing. You can also find our DVDs and our brewer's logbook, where you can track and log up to 50 batches of beer.
It's really good.
That is tasty.
That's really good.
It's good for a first beer of the day. You know, when those hops are nice and fresh.
Yeah.
You know, you can your palate's not all worn. Now it's worn out. But
It reminds me of one of those hop candies. Mm-hmm. Like the hops are so fresh in this that it's got that little hop candy.
ooh,
Plus, there's just enough sweetness left in the beer. It's like drinking candy.